I still wake up some nights. The metallic taste of iron thick in my mouth. Remembering that strange summer of 1987 at the Gomel meat factory in Belarus. The taste wasn't just from the processing floor, it was something else. Something that still wakes me decades later. What had I seen that terrible day? Most of the workers had already quit after the Chornobyl disaster. They'd seen the readings on the dosimeters, watched them spike higher each day as more cattle rolled in from the evacuation zone. The numbers were dangerous. We all knew these animals had been grazing on radioactive pastures since the explosion 1 year earlier, but the factory managers kept assuring us everything was fine. I didn't trust them. Disaster would not stand in the way of their production quotas. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. 50,000 head of livestock had been rounded up from around the reactor, and instead of being buried, they were sent to slaughterhouses like ours. We pretended everything was fine, but from the whispers, you could tell we were all nervous. What would all of this radioactive meat do to us, the people handling it? The radiation monitors, hastily trained and ill-equipped, rushed through their rounds. They would glance over at us, then turn away, whispering. Sometimes I'd catch them turning down the volume on their devices, muffling the constant beeping that echoed through our cutting floor. We did our best to ignore the noise, but it was always there, reminding us of the danger passing through our hands. Still, the money was good, and I had a family to feed. The Soviet officials had given us our orders: mix the contaminated meat with clean meat and process it all into sausages. The strategy was chillingly simple. Dilute the radiation and spread it thin. Only the elites in Moscow and Leningrad were spared from our tainted products. The rest of the Soviet Union would unknowingly consume what we processed. I feel sick to my stomach thinking about it now. The night everything changed, I was alone in the freezer section, logging inventory. The cold cut to my bones, and my fingers shook so badly I could barely hold the pencil. Our freezers were stuffed beyond capacity with meat that exceeded safe contamination levels. The paperwork mysteriously never showed where the meat came from, just serial numbers and destinations. But that night, something was different. The whole freezer was packed with meat from the zone. No mixing, no processing, just rows and rows of contaminated cattle waiting to be shipped out. I didn't want to be around it for too long and couldn't wait to get out of there. I remember standing there, clipboard in hand, when the lights flickered. Great, another power outage, I thought. I stood alone for a moment in the dark. Then the emergency generator kicked in with a low hum, casting everything in a dim red glow. Something was different when the lights came on. I looked around, wondering what was off. That's when I noticed it. A soft, bluish shimmer coming from the back corner of the freezer, where we'd stored the most recently delivered meat from Pripyat. Was it just ice crystals catching the light? The temperature in the freezer suddenly dropped even further. My breath came out in thick clouds, and the clipboard slipped from my numbing fingers. I wanted to get out of there. As I bent to pick up the clipboard, I heard it. A wet, sliding sound, like raw meat being dragged across metal. What was moving over in the corner? Was there someone in here with me? There was silence. I straightened slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. I held my breath, praying I was mistaken, and there was nothing there. A scratching sound made me turn around. I gasped. Through the frosted freezer window, I saw a figure moving on the processing floor. No one was supposed to be here at this time. It wasn't one of our workers. The shape was wrong, somehow distorted, like a photograph that had been exposed to intense radiation. I rubbed my eyes. What was I seeing? The The figure moved between the hanging meat with an unnatural grace, touching each one as it passed. Whenever its fingers made contact, that same ethereal blue glow spread through the meat, like Cherenkov radiation from a nuclear reactor. I knew I was looking at something supernatural. I needed to get out of there. I backed away, bumping into a rack of hanging meat. The figure stopped, its head snapping toward me with a motion too quick to be human. "Little butcher," it said, its voice crackling like static and clicking like 1,000 Geiger counters. "We are what you made us." It moved closer, gliding between the meat racks. "We are what you fed them." I ran. My boots slipped in the icy floor as I scrambled toward the freezer door. Behind me, the hanging meat began to glow, each piece lighting up blue like grotesque lanterns as the thing passed them. I could hear it moving faster now, the scratching sound becoming a desperate scrabbling. My panic gave me speed, and I slammed into the door. The handle was frozen solid. I yanked at it with both hands, my fingers burning from the cold. The thing was getting closer. I could feel the radiation coming off it in waves, making my skin tingle and my teeth ache. It was hard to think. Finally, the door gave way with a crack of breaking ice. I burst onto the processing floor, knocking over a cart of knives. They clattered across the concrete as I ran, their steel surfaces reflecting brief flashes of blue light. The thing followed, its movements becoming more frenzied. "You cannot run from what you created," it rasped, its voice now thick with something that sounded horribly like hunger. I ducked under conveyor belts, knocked over racks of equipment, anything to slow it down. But it seemed to move through solid objects like they weren't there, leaving trails of that sickly blue glow in its wake. My lungs were burning by the time I reached the main corridor. There had to be a way out. The emergency lights cast everything in blood-red shadows, and I could hear the thing's voice echoing from multiple directions. "We are all connected now. The meat, the land, the people. All poisoned. All changed." I don't remember how I got out of there. Next thing I knew, I was in my car, driving as fast as I could away from the plant. My skin felt sunburned, and my mouth tasted like metal. The car's radio crackled with static that sounded almost like words. I slammed it off and pressed on the gas, hearing only the squeal of my tires on the road. When I finally worked up the courage to go back 3 days later, the freezer was empty. One of the workers said the meat had been loaded onto 4 refrigerated train cars, but they didn't know where it was headed. Nobody mentioned the power outage, or the blue light, or the figure. Later, I learned the truth. Those train cars became notorious, rejected at every station they tried to stop at, first in the Republic of Georgia, then in other regions. For nearly 4 years, that radioactive cargo circled the Soviet railways. Local officials would wave their dosimeters over the freight cars and refuse the load, sending it on to become someone else's problem. By 1990, in the scorching Ukrainian summer, the refrigeration units began failing in the village of Polishka. Even the railroad workers refused to repair the cooling systems, knowing what was inside those cars. 317 tons of radioactive meat. They didn't know what I knew, that they contained something else to be afraid of. They say the KGB eventually took control, driving the train to a remote part of Belarus, where they buried it all in a cement-lined trench. But sometimes on cold nights, I wonder if anything can really contain what we created in that place. Was what I saw real? Maybe it was a hallucination, driven by radiation exposure. Maybe it was a nightmare born of our guilt. That's what I tell myself. Because the alternative is worse. that we poisoned something deep in the world. Something that's still there, still waiting, still hungry. Either way, I know one thing. Some contamination never goes away. It just sinks deeper, spreads wider, waits longer. Like that buried train, like the ghost of Chernobyl, like the guilt that still wakes me, tasting of metal and glowing blue in the dark. Thank you for watching this Dark 5 story. Let me know what you think, and if you want to hear more stories like this. Click the link on screen or in the description to watch my video about the real history that inspired this story.